show me a couple.
What happens when a disciplined martial arts expert from Hong Kong is forced to work with the loudest and most unpredictable detective in Los Angeles? That question became the foundation of one of the most entertaining buddy cop movies ever made, Rush Hour. Released in 1998 and directed by Brett Ratner, the film combined breathtaking martial arts action with unforgettable comedy and instantly became a global hit. Starring the legendary Jackie Chan and the energetic comedian Chris Tucker, the movie created one of cinema's most iconic partnerships. If you enjoy action movies packed with humor, exciting fight scenes, and incredible chemistry between the lead actors, this story delivers all of it in spectacular fashion. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments about your favorite scene from this classic action comedy adventure. The story begins in the busy and beautiful city of Hong Kong, where Detective Inspector Lee is already famous for his exceptional martial arts skills and his ability to solve difficult cases. Lee is respected by everyone around him because he combines discipline, intelligence, and loyalty in everything he does. More importantly, he shares a close friendship with Chinese diplomat Consul Han and has become almost like family to him over the years. One day, Lee joins a major operation against a dangerous criminal organization involved in smuggling priceless Chinese treasures. During the mission, Lee demonstrates incredible fighting skills as he moves through warehouses full of criminals, defeating enemies with speed and precision that leave everyone amazed. The operation appears successful, but one important member of the criminal group manages to escape with valuable artifacts and disappears without leaving a trace. Although the mission ends with a partial victory, Lee senses that the escaped criminal will create bigger problems in the future. His instincts prove correct much sooner than anyone expected. The criminal organization has not forgotten its defeat, and revenge begins to grow inside the minds of those responsible for the smuggling network. Meanwhile, across the Pacific Ocean in Los Angeles, Detective James Carter is living a completely different life. Carter is energetic, funny, and incredibly confident in his abilities. He considers himself one of the best detectives in the city and never misses an opportunity to remind others about it. Unlike Lee's calm and disciplined personality, Carter talks constantly, jokes during serious situations, and prefers improvisation over careful planning. Carter spends his days chasing criminals through crowded streets while entertaining everyone around him with endless conversations and sarcastic comments. Even though some of his colleagues find him annoying, nobody can deny that he is talented at his job. His instincts often help him solve cases that leave other detectives confused. However, Carter's biggest weakness is his tendency to ignore instructions from his superiors. During one operation, his reckless behavior creates chaos and causes significant property damage. Although he catches the criminals, his captain becomes furious with the destruction left behind. As punishment, Carter is temporarily removed from important investigations and assigned less exciting duties. Carter refuses to accept that he is being sidelined. He believes the police department cannot function properly without him and spends his time trying to convince everyone that he deserves bigger responsibilities. His confidence remains unshaken even when others clearly disagree with his opinion. At the same time, Consul Han arrives in Los Angeles with his young daughter Soo Young. The visit is supposed to strengthen diplomatic relationships and provide opportunities for important meetings between officials. Soo Young, who has known Lee for years, is excited about the trip and enjoys practicing martial arts techniques that Lee taught her back in Hong Kong. The peaceful visit suddenly turns into a nightmare when dangerous criminals kidnap Soo Young in broad daylight. The kidnapping shocks everyone and immediately becomes an international crisis involving both American and Chinese authorities. Consul Han is devastated and desperately wants the person he trusts most, Inspector Lee, to help find his daughter. Lee receives the heartbreaking news in Hong Kong and immediately prepares to travel to Los Angeles. His loyalty to Consul Han and his affection for Soo Young leave him with no hesitation. He promises that he will do everything possible to bring her home safely. When Lee arrives in America, political officials become nervous about allowing a foreign detective to participate in an active investigation. The local law enforcement agencies worry that international involvement could complicate the case and create unnecessary pressure. Instead of openly refusing Lee's request, they decide to keep him distracted while their own agents handle the investigation. Their solution is simple but incredibly ironic. They assign Detective James Carter to keep Inspector Lee occupied and away from the real investigation. The authorities believe Carter's personality will clash with Lee's disciplined nature, ensuring that neither detective interferes with official operations. Carter initially sees the assignment as an insult. Instead of working on an important kidnapping case, he has been asked to babysit a detective from another country. Frustrated and annoyed, he prepares to meet Lee with very low expectations. Lee, on the other hand, arrives expecting cooperation and professionalism from the Los Angeles Police Department. He has no idea that officials are trying to keep him away from the investigation involving his friend's daughter. His only focus is finding clues and rescuing Soo Young before it becomes too late. The first meeting between Lee and Carter immediately reveals how different they truly are. Carter talks endlessly, while Lee remains calm and observant. Carter drives recklessly through city streets while Lee quietly watches in disbelief. Their personalities collide almost instantly, creating awkward but hilarious moments that neither detective could have predicted. Despite their differences, something interesting begins to happen. Beneath Carter's jokes and endless confidence, lies a detective with genuine instincts and determination. Beneath Lee's calm exterior exists a man willing to risk everything for the people he cares about. Neither man realizes it yet, but together they may become the only hope of saving Su Young and uncovering the truth behind the kidnapping. The investigation is about to begin, and the unlikely partnership between Inspector Lee and Detective Carter is ready to change both of their lives forever. Inspector Lee wastes no time trying to join the investigation, but it quickly becomes obvious that the Los Angeles Police Department has no intention of letting him participate. Every time Lee asks about new leads or evidence, he receives vague answers or is politely redirected somewhere else. Lee is intelligent enough to realize that something is wrong, but he chooses patience over confrontation. His mission is to save Su Young, not to create conflict with local authorities. Detective Carter, meanwhile, is still frustrated with his assignment. He believes babysitting a foreign detective is beneath his talents and constantly complains about missing out on the real case. However, as he spends more time with Lee, Carter begins to notice something remarkable. Lee is not an ordinary police officer. His sharp observation skills and calm confidence suggest years of experience handling dangerous criminals. Their first major disagreement happens when Lee attempts to leave and investigate on his own. Carter tries to stop him, reminding him that he was ordered to keep him occupied. Lee ignores the warning and follows a clue connected to the kidnapping. Carter reluctantly follows behind, partly because of his orders and partly because he is curious about what Lee might discover. The trail leads them to a Chinese restaurant where Lee believes members of the criminal organization have been meeting secretly. Carter doubts the theory at first, but Lee notices small details that everyone else missed. Certain symbols, coded conversations, and suspicious behavior convince him that they are closer to the kidnappers than anyone realizes. Inside the restaurant, the detectives attract attention almost immediately. Carter's loud personality clashes with the quiet atmosphere, while Lee carefully studies the people around them. Before long, their investigation turns into a confrontation with armed criminals who have no intention of answering questions peacefully. What follows is the first glimpse of the partnership that would eventually make them famous. Lee moves through the room with incredible speed, using martial arts techniques to defeat attackers without hesitation. Chairs fly across the room, tables collapse, and criminals find themselves thrown to the floor before they can even react. Carter watches in complete disbelief. He has never seen anyone fight like this before. Every movement is precise, efficient, and perfectly controlled. While Lee handles the physical confrontation, Carter uses his quick thinking and street instincts to keep the situation from becoming even more dangerous. Although the criminals escape before revealing important information, Lee manages to recover evidence that connects the kidnappers to a larger criminal network operating inside Los Angeles. The case is becoming more complicated with every new clue they uncover. Back at police headquarters, officials are unhappy that Lee and Carter interfered with the investigation. Carter receives another lecture from his superiors, who accuse him of making the situation worse instead of following orders. Carter argues that they are finally making progress while everyone else is wasting time with paperwork and politics. Lee remains calm during the argument, but privately he grows increasingly worried about Soo Young's safety. Every hour that passes gives the kidnappers more opportunities to move her somewhere else. For Lee, the case is personal and failure is not an option. As the investigation continues, Carter slowly starts respecting Lee's abilities. He realizes that beneath Lee's quiet personality is a fearless detective, willing to face impossible odds without hesitation. At the same time, Lee begins appreciating Carter's unique strengths. Carter understands the city, reads people well, and often notices details that others ignore. The two detectives decide to continue working together regardless of what their bosses think. Official approval no longer matters to them. Their only priority is finding Soo Young before the kidnappers carry out whatever plans they have prepared. Their search eventually leads them to a warehouse connected to the criminal organization. Believing they may finally have found the kidnappers' headquarters, Lee and Carter sneak inside, hoping to gather evidence before calling for backup. Unfortunately, the criminals are expecting visitors. Within moments, the detectives find themselves surrounded by armed gang members. The situation becomes dangerous immediately, but surrender has never been part of either man's personality. Lee launches himself into action, using every object around him as a weapon, while Carter provides support with quick thinking and impressive determination. The warehouse turns into complete chaos. Crates are destroyed, equipment crashes to the ground, and criminals are sent flying in every direction. Lee's fighting skills continue to amaze Carter, while Carter's courage earns Lee's growing respect. Despite surviving the confrontation, the detectives discover something troubling. The kidnappers appear to be working for someone much more powerful and organized than they originally believed. The kidnapping is not simply about money. There are larger motives hidden beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Consul Han receives communication from the kidnappers demanding an enormous ransom payment in exchange for his daughter's safe return. The message makes it clear that the criminals are serious and willing to use violence if their demands are ignored. Han faces an impossible choice. Paying the ransom could save his daughter but might encourage further crimes. Refusing could place Soo Young in even greater danger. The pressure on him grows with every passing moment. Lee promises Han that he will rescue Soo Young no matter what happens. His determination becomes stronger than ever, and Carter stands beside him without hesitation. What began as an unwanted assignment has become a mission that both detectives take personally. For the first time since arriving in Los Angeles, Lee and Carter are no longer strangers forced to work together. They are partners. And somewhere in the city, the kidnappers are preparing for the next stage of their plan, unaware that two of the most determined detectives imaginable are getting closer to the truth with every passing hour. The partnership between Inspector Lee and Detective Carter grows stronger as they continue chasing every lead connected to Soo Young's kidnapping. Although their personalities remain completely different, they slowly begin understanding how to use their differences as strengths rather than weaknesses. Lee brings discipline, patience, and incredible fighting abilities, while Carter contributes street knowledge, confidence, and an instinct for reading people in difficult situations. Their latest evidence points toward a criminal operation that has been moving valuable Chinese artifacts through Los Angeles for years. Lee immediately notices the connection between the smugglers he fought back in Hong Kong and the people responsible for the kidnapping. The case is no longer simply about a ransom payment. Someone involved in the old smuggling network appears to be seeking revenge against Consul Han. Carter starts digging through police records and discovers that several known criminals connected to international smuggling organizations have recently entered the city. One particular name catches Lee's attention immediately. The man was involved in criminal activities in Hong Kong and disappeared shortly after Lee disrupted the smuggling operation years earlier. For Lee, the discovery confirms his fears. The kidnapping may have been planned long before Su Yung ever arrived in Los Angeles. The criminals have likely spent years waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back against Consul Han and the people close to him. Determined to move faster than the kidnappers, Lee and Carter follow another lead that takes them to a busy street market connected to underground trading operations. The area is crowded with merchants, tourists, and workers, making it the perfect place for criminals to exchange information without attracting attention. While Carter speaks with local contacts, Lee quietly observes the crowd. His sharp instincts quickly notice suspicious individuals watching them from a distance. Before either detective can react, the suspects begin running through the crowded streets. A high speed chase immediately begins. Carter jumps into pursuit, shouting at pedestrians to move out of the way while racing through traffic and market stalls. Lee follows with incredible agility, leaping over obstacles and moving through narrow spaces that seem impossible to navigate. The chase becomes one of the most exciting moments of their investigation. The suspects eventually reach a busy construction area where they attempt to escape by climbing onto unfinished structures. Lee follows without hesitation, using pipes, ladders, and scaffolding to continue the pursuit high above the streets below. Carter struggles to keep up but refuses to quit. Even while complaining loudly about heights and dangerous situations, he continues climbing after his partner. Their determination prevents the suspects from escaping completely, and one of the criminals is finally captured. During questioning, the captured suspect refuses to reveal important details but accidentally confirms one crucial fact: Su Yung is still alive. For Lee and Carter, this information changes everything. Until now, they feared they might already be too late. Knowing that Su Yung is alive gives them renewed energy and determination to continue fighting. Meanwhile, the kidnappers grow increasingly nervous. Their leaders realize that Lee and Carter are making progress much faster than expected. The original plan relied on police following predictable procedures and waiting for negotiations to continue. Instead, the detectives are actively dismantling parts of the criminal network. The criminals decide that stronger action is necessary. Soon after, Lee and Carter survive another ambush designed to eliminate them permanently. Armed attackers surround them in a crowded location, forcing the detectives into another intense battle for survival. Lee once again demonstrates why criminals fear him so much. Using speed, precision, and creativity, he turns ordinary objects into defensive tools while neutralizing attackers one after another. Carter fights alongside him with determination, proving that courage can sometimes be just as important as martial arts skills. By the end of the confrontation, the attackers retreat, but the message is clear. Someone powerful wants the investigation stopped at any cost. Back at headquarters, the FBI and local authorities continue preparing for the ransom exchange. Their plan involves surveillance teams, undercover agents, and carefully coordinated movements designed to rescue Soo Young without endangering her life. Lee, however, believes the kidnappers expect traditional police tactics. He worries that relying entirely on official procedures could allow the criminals to escape once again. Carter surprisingly agrees with him, showing how much his perspective has changed since meeting Lee. The two detectives decide to continue their own investigation alongside the official operation. Their goal is simple: identify the mastermind before the ransom exchange takes place. Eventually, another clue leads them to discover the true scale of the conspiracy. The kidnapping operation involves international criminals, stolen treasures, and personal revenge that stretches back many years. The enemy they are facing is far more dangerous than they originally imagined. As the deadline for the ransom exchange approaches, the pressure on everyone involved reaches dangerous levels. Consul Han is desperate to save his daughter, the authorities are struggling to stay in control of the investigation, and Inspector Lee can feel time slipping away with every passing hour. Somewhere in Los Angeles, Soo Young is still being held captive, and nobody knows how long the kidnappers are willing to wait before changing their plans. The possibility of an insider changes the entire investigation. Carter begins reviewing information about everyone connected to the operation, searching for patterns that others may have missed. Meanwhile, Lee focuses on the criminals involved in the old smuggling case from Hong Kong. The more they investigate, the more obvious the connection becomes between past events and the current kidnapping. Their search leads them to another important figure connected to international crime networks operating between Asia and America. The man has built a reputation for staying hidden while allowing others to take the risks for him. Few people have ever seen him directly, but many criminals fear his influence and power. Before Lee and Carter can learn more, they discover that the official ransom exchange is already being prepared. Federal agents plan to deliver the money while surveillance teams secretly monitor the area. Their objective is simple: rescue Soo Young and arrest the kidnappers during the exchange. On paper, the strategy looks perfect. Lee disagrees immediately. He believes the kidnappers expect police intervention and probably have backup plans ready. If anything goes wrong, Soo Young could become the victim. Carter supports Lee's concerns, but convincing the authorities proves impossible. With no other choice, the detectives decide to monitor the exchange themselves. The meeting begins exactly as expected. The kidnappers arrive to collect the ransom, while law enforcement officers observe from hidden positions nearby. For a brief moment, it appears the operation may actually succeed without violence. Then everything falls apart. One unexpected move causes panic among the criminals, and within seconds the exchange turns into complete chaos. Vehicles speed away from the scene, officers begin chasing suspects, and gunfire erupts in multiple directions. Lee immediately focuses on finding Soo-young. Ignoring the confusion around him, he follows the kidnappers responsible for moving her to another location. Carter races behind him, refusing to let his partner face the danger alone. The pursuit takes them across crowded streets and through areas filled with civilians who have no idea what is happening around them. Lee uses every shortcut he can find while Carter somehow manages to keep up despite constantly complaining about the situation. Eventually, they discover evidence that the kidnappers have moved Soo-young to a heavily guarded location connected to the criminal organization. For Lee, this is the confirmation he needed. The kidnappers never intended to complete the ransom exchange honestly. Their true objective lies elsewhere, and the money was only part of a much larger plan. As night approaches, Lee and Carter prepare for what could be their most dangerous mission yet. The criminals know that police are searching for them. Security around their hideout will be stronger than ever. Any mistake could cost innocent lives. Before moving in, Carter surprises Lee with a rare moment of seriousness. He admits that when they first met, he thought Lee was simply another visitor getting in the way of real police work. Now, after everything they have survived together, Carter considers Lee one of the best partners he has ever had. Lee responds with his usual quiet confidence, but makes it clear that Carter has earned his respect as well. Their friendship, built through chaos and danger, has become one of the investigation's greatest strengths. As they approach the suspected hideout, they carefully study the building and the guards protecting it. The situation looks difficult but not impossible. Lee creates a plan based on stealth and precision. Carter listens carefully before pointing out that his own plans usually involve much more running and shouting. Despite the joke, both detectives know how serious the coming hours will be. Inside the building, Soo-young remains surprisingly brave despite everything she has experienced. Remembering the lessons Lee taught her years earlier, she refuses to lose hope and continues searching for opportunities to escape. The night air around the building felt heavy with tension as Inspector Lee and Detective Carter prepared to make their move. From a distance, the location looked more like an ordinary warehouse than the center of a massive criminal operation, but both detectives knew appearances could be deceiving. Armed guards patrolled every entrance, vehicles moved in and out at regular intervals, and security measures suggested that something extremely important was being protected inside. For Lee, there was no doubt in his mind that Soo-young was somewhere within those walls. Lee carefully observed the movements of the guards and quickly identified weaknesses in their patrol patterns. His years of experience taught him that patience often achieved more than rushing blindly into danger. Carter, however, struggled with the idea of waiting quietly. Standing still had never been one of his strengths. Even in the middle of one of the biggest cases of his career, he could not resist making jokes about how criminals always seem to choose warehouses for secret meetings. Using Lee's plan, the two detectives managed to enter the building without immediately alerting everyone inside. The warehouse was filled with crates, shipping containers, and stolen artifacts connected to the smuggling network that Lee had investigated years earlier in Hong Kong. Seeing the stolen treasures confirmed that the kidnapping and the smuggling operation were deeply connected. This was not simply a ransom scheme, it was revenge mixed with greed and international crime. As they moved deeper into the building, Lee suddenly heard a familiar voice in the distance. For a brief moment, relief crossed his face because he recognized Soo-young speaking to one of the guards. She was alive. That single fact erased some of the fear that had been building inside him since arriving in Los Angeles. Carter noticed the change immediately and understood that they were finally close to ending the nightmare. Unfortunately, their presence was discovered before they could reach her. Alarms echoed through the warehouse as armed criminals appeared from every direction. Within seconds, the quiet rescue mission transformed into complete chaos. Lee launched himself into action, using his incredible martial arts skills to fight multiple attackers at once while Carter covered him and searched for a path toward Soo-young's location. The fight spread across the entire warehouse. Lee jumped between crates, climbed railings, and turned ordinary objects into defensive tools against the criminals surrounding him. Carter, although lacking Lee's martial arts abilities, relied on courage, quick decisions, and pure determination to survive. The contrast between their fighting styles perfectly reflected their personalities, yet together they formed an incredibly effective team. During the battle, Lee finally came face to face with one of the key figures behind the operation. The confrontation confirmed what he had suspected for days. The kidnapping had been planned as an act of revenge connected to the failed smuggling operation in Hong Kong. Old grudges and unfinished business had created the crisis they were now fighting to stop. Meanwhile, Carter managed to reach the room where Soo-young was being held. Although frightened, she remained remarkably brave and immediately recognized that help had arrived. Carter reassured her that everything would be fine, even while danger surrounded them from every direction. For the first time since the kidnapping began, hope finally started to replace fear. Just as it seemed victory was within reach, the true mastermind behind the operation revealed himself and prepared to escape before the authorities could arrive. Lee realized that capturing this man was just as important as rescuing Soo-young. Allowing him to disappear would only guarantee that more innocent people would suffer in the future. The stage was now set for the final confrontation that would determine the fate of everyone involved. Lee pursued the mastermind with unwavering focus. Carter protected Soo-young while fighting off remaining criminals, and police forces rushed toward the warehouse after finally learning the detective's location. Years later, fans would remember this sequence as one of the most exciting parts of Rush Hour, showcasing exactly why the partnership between Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker became so iconic. The warehouse echoed with the sounds of crashing crates, breaking glass, and shouting criminals as the battle reached its most dangerous stage. Inspector Lee knew that every second mattered now. Somewhere inside the massive building, the mastermind behind the kidnapping was preparing his escape, and if he succeeded, months of planning and countless risks would have been for nothing. At the same time, Lee could not ignore the safety of Soo-young, whose rescue remained his highest priority. Balancing both objectives would require perfect timing and absolute trust in his partner. Detective Carter stepped forward to protect Soo-young while Lee continued deeper into the warehouse. Earlier in the investigation, Carter might have complained about being left behind, but things were different now. He understood exactly what Lee was trying to do and accepted his role without hesitation. The two detectives had finally reached the point where words were no longer necessary. After surviving car chases, ambushes, and countless arguments together, they had developed complete trust in each other's abilities. As Carter guided Soo-young towards safety, more criminals appeared and attempted to block their escape route. Carter immediately placed himself between the attackers and the young girl, refusing to allow anyone near her. Although he lacked Lee's martial arts skills, he compensated with courage and determination. His confidence, humor, and refusal to panic helped keep Soo-young calm even while chaos surrounded them from every direction. Meanwhile, Lee pursued the leader of the operation through the upper levels of the warehouse. The chase carried them across metal walkways, narrow platforms, and unstable structures high above the ground below. Every step carried danger, but Lee never slowed down. Years of training had prepared him for moments exactly like this. He moved with speed and precision, closing the distance between himself and the escaping criminal. The confrontation that followed was intense and personal. For Lee, this was more than a fight against another criminal. The kidnapping had targeted people he cared about deeply, and the pain caused to Consul Han and Soo-young had transformed the mission into something personal. The criminal attempted to use weapons, threats, and every possible advantage, but Lee refused to back down. His determination became stronger with every passing moment. Below, Carter and Soo-young finally reached an exit, only to discover that more members of the criminal organization were waiting outside. Once again, Carter found himself facing impossible odds. Instead of giving up, he improvised, using whatever resources were available around him. His quick thinking created enough confusion to keep the attackers distracted while waiting for help to arrive. Police sirens soon filled the night as law enforcement officers surrounded the area. The criminals realized their escape routes were disappearing quickly, and panic began spreading through their ranks. Some attempted to flee while others continued fighting in desperation. The operation that had been carefully planned for months was collapsing right in front of them. High above the warehouse floor, Lee finally gained the upper hand during his fight with the mastermind. The criminal's confidence slowly disappeared as he realized that escape was becoming impossible. Years of planning, revenge, and greed had led him to this moment, and now everything was slipping away. Lee gave him one final chance to surrender peacefully, but the man refused and continued fighting. The struggle ended only when the criminal's own decisions led to his downfall. Justice had finally caught up with him, bringing an end to the conspiracy that had started with old grudges and stolen treasures years earlier. For Lee, the victory brought relief rather than celebration. His thoughts immediately returned to Soo-young and whether she was safe. Moments later, Lee reunited with Carter and Soo-young outside the warehouse as emergency crews and police officers secured the scene. Seeing Soo-young unharmed brought visible relief to everyone involved. Consul Han soon arrived and embraced his daughter, overwhelmed with gratitude and emotion after days of fear and uncertainty. For Carter and Lee, however, the moment meant even more than the successful rescue. What had started as an unwanted assignment and an awkward partnership had transformed into a genuine friendship built through trust, sacrifice, and shared danger. Neither detective would ever admit it openly, but both knew that they could not have solved the case without the other. The rescue operation was finally over, but the atmosphere outside the warehouse remained intense as police officers secured the area and arrested the surviving members of the criminal organization. Flashing lights reflected off police vehicles while investigators moved quickly to collect evidence from the scene. For the authorities, the case represented one of the biggest international investigations they had handled in years. For Inspector Lee and Detective Carter, however, the night meant something far more personal. They had brought Soo-young back safely. Consul Han arrived shortly afterward and immediately rushed toward his daughter. The emotional reunion brought relief to everyone who had worked on the case. For days, Han had lived with the fear that he might never see his daughter again, and now that nightmare was finally over. He thanked both detectives for everything they had done, fully aware that official procedures alone would never have solved the case in time. Their willingness to ignore orders and trust their instincts had made the difference. Lee stood quietly during the reunion, satisfied simply knowing that Soo-young was safe. Throughout the investigation, his determination had never weakened, even during moments when success seemed impossible. His loyalty to Consul Han and his affection for Soo-young had driven every decision he made. Although Lee rarely expressed emotions openly, the relief on his face said more than words ever could. Carter, meanwhile, handled the situation in a way only Carter could. Even after surviving explosions, gunfights, and endless chaos, he still found time to joke about finally deserving recognition for saving an international kidnapping victim. His humor brought smiles to people who had spent days under enormous pressure. Beneath the jokes, however, Carter understood how close they had come to failure and how fortunate they were to have succeeded. As investigators examined the evidence collected from the warehouse, they uncovered the full scale of the criminal operation. The organization had been involved in smuggling valuable artifacts across international borders for years, using complex networks to avoid law enforcement attention. The kidnapping of Soo-young had simply been the latest chapter in a much larger criminal enterprise built on greed and revenge. The discovery answered many of the questions that had haunted the investigation from the beginning. The criminals had not acted impulsively or randomly. Every step had been carefully planned long before Consul Han arrived in Los Angeles. The kidnapping, the ransom demands, and the attempts to eliminate Lee and Carter had all been pieces of a larger strategy designed to punish old enemies while creating enormous financial gains. Although the immediate danger had passed, the experience changed both detectives in unexpected ways. Lee arrived in Los Angeles expecting professionalism and cooperation, but instead found politics and bureaucracy standing in the way of justice. Carter began the case, believing he was simply babysitting a visitor from another country, only to discover one of the most capable partners he would ever work beside. Their friendship had grown through arguments, misunderstandings, and dangerous situations that forced them to depend on one another completely. Lee learned to appreciate Carter's instincts, humor, and ability to adapt under pressure. Carter gained respect for Lee's discipline, patience, and incredible dedication to protecting innocent people. Before returning to Hong Kong, Lee shared a quiet conversation with Carter about everything they had experienced together. Neither man was comfortable discussing emotions directly, but both understood the importance of the moment. They had started as strangers with completely opposite personalities and finished as trusted friends who had saved lives together. As they prepared to go their separate ways, Carter joked that Los Angeles would become boring without someone constantly correcting his mistakes. Lee responded with one of his rare smiles, showing that despite all their differences, their partnership had become something neither expected nor wanted to lose. The events of the case would soon become legendary within law enforcement circles, remembered not only because of the successful rescue, but because of the unlikely friendship formed in the middle of chaos. Two detectives from opposite sides of the world had discovered that trust and determination could overcome almost any obstacle. For most people, this would have been the end of the story. For Lee and Carter, it was only the beginning of an unforgettable partnership that audiences around the world would continue to enjoy for years to come through future adventures. With the case officially closed, life slowly began returning to normal for everyone involved. Police departments completed their reports, international agencies coordinated the transfer of arrested criminals, and the media celebrated the successful rescue of Sue Young. Across Los Angeles, the story quickly became headline news. Few people knew the full truth behind the operation, but those who did understood that the outcome had depended heavily on the efforts of two detectives who were never supposed to work together in the first place. Inspector Lee spent his final days in Los Angeles helping authorities identify members of the smuggling organization and recover stolen cultural artifacts that had disappeared years earlier. Each recovered treasure represented another victory against the criminal network that had caused so much damage across multiple countries. For Lee, bringing those artifacts home carried almost as much importance as arresting the criminals themselves. Protecting history and protecting people were responsibilities he took equally seriously. Detective Carter, meanwhile, enjoyed reminding everyone that he had played a major role in solving the case. Whether he was speaking to fellow officers or anyone willing to listen, Carter made sure his version of events included plenty of heroic moments featuring himself. Some details may have become slightly exaggerated with each retelling, but nobody could deny that he had earned the right to celebrate. After all, he had risked his life repeatedly to protect Sue Young and support his partner. Despite his usual confidence, Carter privately admitted that the experience had changed him. Working alongside Lee taught him the value of patience, discipline, and preparation. He realized that talent alone was not always enough, and that sometimes the best results came from trusting others rather than trying to do everything alone. It was a lesson he never expected to learn, especially from someone whose personality was so different from his own. Lee experienced similar changes. Before arriving in America, he often preferred working independently and relying entirely on his own abilities. Carter's creativity and unpredictability showed him that there were many ways to solve problems, and that unconventional thinking could sometimes succeed where strict planning failed. Their partnership worked precisely because each detective compensated for the other's weaknesses. Before leaving for Hong Kong, Lee and Carter shared one final day together in Los Angeles. Without kidnappers, explosions, or criminals chasing them, the city felt strangely peaceful. Carter took the opportunity to show Lee places that had nothing to do with investigations or police work, determined to prove that Los Angeles offered more than warehouses and crime scenes. The conversations between them felt very different from the awkward exchanges during their first meeting. The frustration and misunderstandings that once defined their relationship had disappeared completely, replaced by mutual respect and genuine friendship. Neither detective needed to explain what they were thinking anymore. Months of danger and teamwork had created an understanding that few partnerships ever achieve. Eventually, the time came for Lee to return home. At the airport, the farewell was simple but meaningful. Carter joked that if Lee ever returned to Los Angeles, he should make sure another international incident happened first so they could work together again. Lee smiled and replied that he hoped their next meeting would involve less danger and fewer explosions. As Lee's plane disappeared into the distance, Carter stood watching for a moment longer than he expected. The city would continue moving forward, new cases would arrive, and life would return to its usual rhythm. but he knew that this partnership had been different from anything he had experienced before. The adventure that began with suspicion and frustration had ended with friendship and respect. That unexpected bond became one of the reasons why Rush Hour remains so memorable for audiences around the world. The action was exciting, the comedy was unforgettable, but the heart of the story was always the relationship between Inspector Lee and Detective Carter. Inspector Lee had already begun settling back into his life in Hong Kong, but the memories of Los Angeles remained fresh in his mind. The kidnapping case had tested him in ways he never expected, forcing him to work in unfamiliar surroundings while trusting someone whose methods often seemed completely opposite to his own. Yet, despite all the chaos, arguments, and danger, he could not deny that Detective Carter had become one of the most reliable partners he had ever known. Back in Los Angeles, Carter quickly returned to his usual routine, although life no longer felt exactly the same. His fellow officers listened with amusement as he retold stories from the investigation, usually placing himself at the center of every heroic moment. According to Carter's version of events, he had practically rescued the entire city single-handedly, while Lee simply helped from time to time. Nobody believed all of his stories, but everyone enjoyed hearing them anyway. Although Carter enjoyed the attention, he privately missed the excitement of working alongside someone who constantly challenged him to improve. Lee's discipline and focus had pushed him to become a better detective, even if he would never admit it openly. For perhaps the first time in his career, Carter found himself respecting another officer enough to miss having him around. Meanwhile, international investigators continued uncovering information about the smuggling network that had organized Su Young's kidnapping. Documents recovered from the warehouse led to arrests in multiple countries, exposing criminal connections that authorities had spent years trying to identify. What initially appeared to be a simple kidnapping case had ultimately dismantled a much larger international organization. Consul Han remained grateful for everything Lee and Carter had done for his family. Su Young had returned safely, and the people responsible for her suffering had finally faced justice. Although the experience had been terrifying, it also reminded Han of the importance of loyalty and friendship during difficult times. Without those qualities, the outcome could have been very different. Su Young herself recovered surprisingly quickly from the ordeal. Her courage during captivity had impressed everyone involved in the investigation, especially Lee, who saw in her the same determination that had helped him survive difficult moments throughout his own career. Rather than allowing fear to define her, she focused on moving forward and appreciating the people who had fought so hard to bring her home. For Lee, the case served as another reminder that justice often required sacrifice and persistence. There had been moments during the investigation when success seemed impossible and when political obstacles threatened to stop progress completely. Yet every setback had only strengthened his resolve to continue. That determination had ultimately saved a life and destroyed a dangerous criminal organization. The experience also reinforced an important lesson about partnership. Lee and Carter succeeded not because they were similar, but because they were different. Their strengths balanced each other perfectly. Lee's patience complemented Carter's energy, while Carter's creativity compensated for Lee's tendency to rely heavily on structure and planning. Separately, they were excellent detectives. Together, they became something even greater. As months passed, stories about the case spread through law enforcement communities in both America and Hong Kong. Officers spoke about the unusual partnership that had overcome international politics, organized crime, and impossible odds to rescue an innocent child. The details varied depending on who told the story, but one fact remained constant: neither detective could have solved the case alone. Looking back, it became clear that the true victory of the case was not only the rescue of Su Young or the destruction of the smuggling network, it was the friendship that emerged between two people who initially could barely tolerate one another. Their journey from reluctant partners to trusted friends gave the story an emotional depth that audiences connected with immediately. That friendship would continue to define future adventures and become the foundation of one of cinema's most beloved action comedy partnerships. The world may have first met them during a kidnapping investigation in Los Angeles, but their story was destined to continue far beyond those events. The legend of Inspector Lee and Detective Carter was only getting started. After days filled with danger, uncertainty, and non-stop action, peace finally began returning to the lives of everyone involved in the case. The nightmare that had started with the kidnapping of Su Young had finally come to an end, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Consul Han could breathe again, knowing that his daughter was safe. The fear that had followed him through every hour of the investigation slowly disappeared, replaced by relief and gratitude toward the two men who refused to give up when everyone else was running out of hope. What had seemed like an impossible mission at the beginning had ended in success, because two detectives from completely different worlds chose to trust each other and fight for the same goal. For Inspector Lee, the mission carried a meaning that went far beyond professional duty. Su Young was not simply the daughter of an important diplomat, she was someone he cared about deeply, almost like a member of his own family. Every risk he took and every fight he entered during the investigation was driven by the promise he had made to Consul Han that he would bring her home safely. Throughout the case, Lee remained calm, even when situations became desperate, proving once again that true strength does not come from anger or fear, but from discipline and determination. His years of experience taught him that panic only creates mistakes, while patience and focus create opportunities. At the same time, Detective Carter experienced one of the biggest changes of his entire career. When he first received the assignment to look after Lee, he saw it as an insult rather than an opportunity. He believed he was being pushed away from important police work and forced into the role of a babysitter for a detective from another country. Carter's confidence often prevented him from seeing value in other people's methods, especially when those methods were so different from his own. However, as the investigation continued, he began to understand that Lee was not someone who needed protection or guidance. Instead, Lee was someone from whom he could learn. Working beside Lee forced Carter to grow in ways he never expected. He learned the importance of patience during investigations and discovered that sometimes silence can reveal more information than endless talking. He learned that preparation and discipline are just as important as instinct and courage. Most importantly, he learned that being part of a team does not make someone weaker. In many cases, trusting another person can become your greatest strength. These lessons changed Carter not only as a detective, but also as a person. Lee also learned valuable lessons from Carter during their time together. Before arriving in Los Angeles, Lee preferred structure, planning, and control over every detail of an operation. Carter represented the complete opposite approach. He trusted his instincts, adapted quickly to changing situations, and often succeeded through creativity rather than preparation. At first, Lee found Carter's methods frustrating and unpredictable, but over time he began to appreciate the value of flexibility and improvisation. Carter showed him that there are many paths to the same destination and that sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places. The friendship that developed between the two detectives became the emotional center of the story. Their relationship started with misunderstandings, frustration, and cultural differences that seemed impossible to overcome. Carter thought Lee was too serious, while Lee believed Carter talked too much and lacked discipline. Yet every challenge they faced together slowly removed those barriers. Surviving dangerous situations forced them to depend on one another completely, and trust replaced the doubts they once had about each other. By the end of the investigation, they understood one another better than many partners who had worked together for years. Carter learned to recognize the moments when Lee was concerned, even if he never said a word, while Lee understood that Carter often used humor to reduce stress and keep people calm during difficult moments. Their friendship felt genuine because it was built through shared experiences rather than simple words. It was earned through sacrifice, loyalty, and mutual respect. The successful rescue of Soo-young also brought closure to a painful chapter in the lives of many people. Consul Han could finally return to his work without the constant fear of losing his daughter. Soo-young herself showed remarkable bravery throughout the ordeal, refusing to lose hope even while surrounded by danger. Her courage reminded everyone involved that strength is not determined by age or physical power, but by the ability to keep believing when circumstances become difficult. Meanwhile, authorities continued investigating the criminal organization responsible for the kidnapping. Evidence collected during the operation led to multiple arrests and exposed an international smuggling network that had operated in secret for years. What began as a kidnapping case eventually became the downfall of a much larger criminal empire. The greed and desire for revenge that motivated the criminals ultimately destroyed everything they had worked to build. Alongside Lee taught him the value of patience, discipline, and preparation. He realized that talent alone was not always enough, and that sometimes the best results came from trusting others rather than trying to do everything alone. It was a lesson he never expected to learn, especially from someone whose personality was so different from his own. Lee experienced similar changes. Before arriving in America, he often preferred working independently and relying entirely on his own abilities. Carter's creativity and unpredictability showed him that there were many ways to solve problems and that unconventional thinking could sometimes succeed where strict planning failed. Their partnership worked precisely because each detective compensated for the other's weaknesses. Before leaving for Hong Kong, Lee and Carter shared one final day together in Los Angeles. Without kidnappers, explosions, or criminals chasing them, the city felt strangely peaceful. Carter took the opportunity to show Lee places that had nothing to do with investigations or police work, determined to prove that Los Angeles offered more than warehouses and crime scenes. The conversations between them felt very different from the awkward exchanges during their first meeting. The frustration and misunderstandings that once defined their relationship had disappeared completely, replaced by mutual respect and genuine friendship. Neither detective needed to explain what they were thinking anymore. Months of danger and teamwork had created an understanding that few partnerships ever achieve. Eventually, the time came for Lee to return home. At the airport, the farewell was simple but meaningful. Carter joked that if Lee ever returned to Los Angeles, he should make sure another international incident happened first so they could work together again. Lee smiled and replied that he hoped their next meeting would involve less danger and fewer explosions. As Lee's plane disappeared into the distance, Carter stood watching for a moment longer than he expected. The city would continue moving forward, new cases would arrive, and life would return to its usual rhythm. But he knew that this partnership had been different from anything he had experienced before. The adventure that began with suspicion and frustration had ended with friendship and respect. That unexpected bond became one of the reasons why Rush Hour remained so memorable for audiences around the world. The action was exciting, the comedy was unforgettable, but the heart of the story was always the relationship between Inspector Lee and Detective Carter. Inspector Lee had already begun settling back into his life in Hong Kong, but the memories of Los Angeles remained fresh in his mind. The kidnapping case had tested him in ways he never expected, forcing him to work in unfamiliar surroundings while trusting someone whose methods often seemed completely opposite to his own. Yet, despite all the chaos, arguments, and danger, he could not deny that Detective Carter had become one of the most reliable partners he had ever known. Back in Los Angeles, Carter quickly returned to his usual routine, although life no longer felt exactly the same. His fellow officers listened with amusement as he retold stories from the investigation, usually placing himself at the center of every heroic moment. According to Carter's version of events, he had practically rescued the entire city single-handedly, while Lee simply helped from time to time. Nobody believed all of his stories, but everyone enjoyed hearing them anyway. Although Carter enjoyed the attention, he privately missed the excitement of working alongside someone who constantly challenged him to improve. Lee's discipline and focus had pushed him to become a better detective, even if he would never admit it openly. For perhaps the first time in his career, Carter found himself respecting another officer enough to miss having him around. Meanwhile, international investigators continued uncovering information about the smuggling network that had organized Su Young's kidnapping. Documents recovered from the warehouse led to arrests in multiple countries, exposing criminal connections that authorities had spent years trying to identify. What initially appeared to be a simple kidnapping case had ultimately dismantled a much larger international organization. Consul Han remained grateful for everything Lee and Carter had done for his family. Su Young had returned safely, and the people responsible for her suffering had finally faced justice. Although the experience had been terrifying, it also reminded Han of the importance of loyalty and friendship during difficult times. Without those, while Lee handles the physical confrontation, Carter uses his quick thinking and street instincts to keep the situation from becoming even more dangerous. Although the criminals escape before revealing important information, Lee manages to recover evidence that connects the kidnappers to a larger criminal network operating inside Los Angeles. The case is becoming more complicated with every new clue they uncover. Back at police headquarters, officials are unhappy that Lee and Carter interfered with the investigation. Carter receives another lecture from his superiors, who accuse him of making the situation worse instead of following orders. Carter argues that they are finally making progress while everyone else is wasting time with paperwork and politics. Lee remains calm during the argument, but privately he grows increasingly worried about Soo Young's safety. Every hour that passes gives the kidnappers more opportunities to move her somewhere else. For Lee, the case is personal and failure is not an option. As the investigation continues, Carter slowly starts respecting Lee's abilities. He realizes that beneath Lee's quiet personality is a fearless detective, willing to face impossible odds without hesitation. At the same time, Lee begins appreciating Carter's unique strengths. Carter understands the city, reads people well, and often notices details that others ignore. The two detectives decide to continue working together regardless of what their bosses think. Official approval no longer matters to them. Their only priority is finding Soo Young before the kidnappers carry out whatever plans they have prepared. Their search eventually leads them to a warehouse connected to the criminal organization. Believing they may finally have found the kidnappers' headquarters, Lee and Carter sneak inside, hoping to gather evidence before calling for backup. Unfortunately, the criminals are expecting visitors. Within moments, the detectives find themselves surrounded by armed gang members. The situation becomes dangerous immediately, but surrender has never been part of either man's personality. Lee launches himself into action, using every object around him as a weapon, while Carter provides support with quick thinking and impressive determination. The warehouse turns into complete chaos. Crates are destroyed, equipment crashes to the ground, and criminals are sent flying in every direction. Lee's fighting skills continue to amaze Carter, while Carter's courage earns Lee's growing respect. Despite surviving the confrontation, the detectives discover something troubling. The kidnappers appear to be working for someone much more powerful and organized than they originally believed. The kidnapping is not simply about money. There are larger. The events of the case quickly became legendary among police officers in both America and Hong Kong. Stories spread about the unlikely partnership between two detectives who should never have worked well together but somehow became an unstoppable team. Some people focused on the action, others remembered the humor, and many admired the determination both men showed throughout the investigation. Regardless of what details people remembered most, everyone agreed on one thing: neither detective could have solved the case alone. This idea became one of the most important messages of the entire story. Success did not come from one person being smarter, stronger, or more talented than everyone else. Success came because two individuals with completely different personalities learned to trust one another and combine their strengths. Their differences were not weaknesses to overcome, but advantages that made them stronger together than they ever could have been apart. That is one of the reasons why Rush Hour continues to remain popular with audiences around the world decades after its release. The action scenes are exciting, the comedy remains memorable, and the adventure keeps viewers entertained from beginning to end. But beneath all of that excitement lies a simple story about friendship, loyalty, and cooperation between people who come from different backgrounds. The performances delivered by Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker transformed that story into something unforgettable. Jackie Chan brought incredible martial arts skills, heart, and sincerity to the role of Inspector Lee, while Chris Tucker filled Detective Carter with energy, humor, and personality. Their chemistry created moments that audiences still remember years later, and their partnership became one of the greatest buddy cop duos in cinema history. The enormous success of the film eventually led to sequels such as Rush Hour 2 and Rush Hour 3, allowing fans to continue enjoying the adventures of Lee and Carter. However, many viewers still consider the original movie special because it introduced the friendship that would define the entire series. In the end, the story of Rush Hour proves that true partnerships are not created because people are similar. They are created because people respect each other's differences and choose to stand beside one another when it matters most. Two detectives from opposite sides of the world came together to rescue an innocent girl and ended up changing each other's lives forever. And that unforgettable friendship is the real reason why audiences continue returning to Rush Hour even after all these years.